Welcome to a new edition of the Derek Evans Show, where we discuss the Shinsei method and other topics relevant to you, to your business, to your work, to your family, to your life. Importance of definitions. In this segment of the show, I want to talk about one of the important aspects of the Shinsei method. The Shinsei method was derived, I developed the Shinsei method really as a reference, as a waypoint, as a guide to help with many of the decisions of life and business that really you need to make, and that you don't have a lot of direction and a lot of practical value or practical knowledge for making. And a lot of times what happens is you go into various training programs, leadership training programs, management training programs, self-development programs, and they are heavy on platitudes and very, very light on meaning and substance. The Shinsei method as a method of training is really oriented toward meaning and substance, toward developing principles and values in a way that really serve as a guide for making decisions. And one of the most important goals of the Shinsei method is to establish a way, a Shinsei way, a method, for making sure that the concepts that you use are well understood. Because what I found is a lot of times people will use various words and concepts, and they mean very different things in very different situations to different people. And a lot of words are laden with moral implications. Duty and obligation are the ones that come to mind immediately. And a lot of times what happens is, if you are a person like I assume you are, if you're watching this show and going to the shinseimethod.com, I'm directing the Shinsei method is really designed for a very specific type of person, someone for whom self-development is important, for whom reason and rationality are important, for goal setting, time management, really people for whom value is important. And I did a lot of series on leading for value, managing for value, communicating for value, living for value. Really striving toward value as a main life's goal and mission. And so if you're going to strive towards something like value in your life, it's important to understand what it means. What does it mean to you? It really, again, means very different things to very different people. And most of the time I found that when people talk about value, just like when they talk about profit and profitability, they often talk about it only in financial terms. It's important to understand value in financial terms, using money as a guide or as a standard of measurement in a way for things like value helps in when you're assessing value of something, value of an investment, value of property, for example, value of a job, in terms of what you're going to be paid for it. Those are all very important considerations. But it's not the only consideration in terms of value. What's of benefit can be of high value to you. And when you're talking about benefit, knowledge can be a very important benefit. A lot of times knowledge can be turned into financial value, financial benefit. So knowledge is very important, and most of the time the first indication or the first introduction that people have for this quest of knowledge, building up what I call a storehouse of value, storehouse of knowledge from within, is school. But unfortunately it's very misleading, because school does not really convey knowledge, competence, value in many cases. Ask yourself, you spend thousands, and I went to school, so I know. I went to college. You spend thousands of dollars, thousands and thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars to get a college education. People are graduating and they have very low competence in their chosen fields. And you can pick a field, accounting, law, medicine included. And you can verify this for yourself by asking questions of your doctor, asking questions of your lawyer, asking questions of your accountant, and listen to the responses that they give. Most of the time it's quite dismissive. So, and usually if someone is dismissive in a profession in particular, it's because they don't have the requisite knowledge. They can't answer the question. If you have the competence, you answer the question easily. And you know how to answer a question easily and quickly. That's from the perspective of the Shinsei method, that's a key indication of high professionalism and high competence. Are you able to take in a question and give it a quick answer? Well, that that speaks for itself, because if you can, that means that you have developed the requisite competence over a period of time to allow you to be able to do that. And of course, that's one of the key goals as far as the Shinsei method is concerned, to develop a heightened sense of competence, of value, of knowledge, and ability. So getting back to the importance of the definition of terms, all the terms I've just used, you should really ask yourself what they mean and how you can apply them in an individually suitable way. That's the second step of the Shinsei method, with 3 steps being: analyze your key terms, define your terms in an individually suitable way, act on those terms, and you can add to those 3 steps 2, reevaluate, repeat. That becomes the process of training, but more importantly, that becomes the process of you. And when you're talking about terms like duty and obligation, what I found is that a lot of times, and I know I lived this, if you are the type of person as I was and am, where you strive toward what I would call more of the Boy Scout tradition, thriftiness, kind, reverent, clean, those kind of important values and characteristics that really serve as a guide for living a cleaner, stronger, more balanced, more well-adjusted life. So these are important values to consider. But what I found is that if you're that type of person to strive toward those types of values, you're going to treat concepts like duty and obligation very differently than a lot of other people. And what I found is that a lot of people will be in situations with you, even if you're working in a workplace, if you're a member of a family, there's really no separation between the two in many cases. A lot of times you will be really exploited in both situations, depending on the kind of value you have and esteem. What I found is that a lot of times other people will use duty and obligation in a very different way. In other words, the duty and obligation is to you, not to them. And so what happens is, if you are striving, and again, I live this, so I know, if you are striving toward living up to the meaning, the true meaning of something like duty and obligation, because they're high-sounding and very noble terms in many cases. A duty and obligation is very strong. If you have a duty to your family, and the family also has a duty to you, that's a very powerful thing. If you have a duty to a company, and the company also has a duty to you, that's a very powerful thing. But what I found is that what people will typically do is they will use duty and obligation while you're trying to live up to it, they're not. That puts you in a very precarious situation. And in many cases, it puts you in a very destructive situation. I'll give you a prime example when we're talking about schools and colleges. A lot of teachers are very quick to talk about what is the duty and obligation for the students, but they say very little about what their duty and obligation is in terms of administering education and making sure that the information that they provide is conveyed appropriately and for the long term to the students, and asking themselves, what's the best way to do that? Now, if you want to verify this for yourself, I can think of many different examples. I've taken many mathematics classes. You walk into a mathematics class and the teacher is late. That tells you something right there. Okay, it doesn't stop there though. You walk into a mathematics classes. I went to one of the top 20 schools in the country. Not that that matters, but there's another indication about duty and obligation. People are often quoting numbers and ranks and things like that, but it doesn't really bear any relationship to the quality that they provide. So the duty and obligation is not adding up in that case, for example. So I've walked into mathematics classes, and I know that mathematics can be very difficult. I happen to like it. I think mathematics is a very interesting field. You can have a lot of insight from the mathematical deduction and logical deduction. And there's something very illuminating about mathematics. If you can struggle with a concept and then really come to a final answer, that answer, there's always going to be, in most situations, a final answer. And there's very few things like that except mathematics. 2 + 2 = 4 being a very simple mathematical equation. So I've gone into mathematics classes with more than 500 people. Now, how can you possibly learn if you have 500 people in a class? But it doesn't stop there. It's a huge auditorium. Teacher walks in late, and guess what? Teacher can't speak English very well. So he's mumbling through the class, his handwriting is poor, and he's late. So in a 50-minute class, you may spend 10 to 20 minutes actually doing mathematics. And what does that mean? That doesn't mean that the teacher is explaining what's going on. He walks in, he opens up a book, starts to do a problem. And he's making a lot of mistakes, and he's erasing a lot of things, and you can't really follow him, and he comes to a final answer. Very often the final answer is wrong. And so he will say, for example, well, it doesn't matter, you get the idea. Now think about that for a moment. What I'm telling you is a situation that happened to me many, many times in college. This was not an isolated instance. This is what they convey. This is what they call really educating people. Now, of course, if you're studying mathematics and you leave from a class like that, you're not going to have the requisite competence in mathematics or anything else. But this is what passes for training in many college classrooms. Now, so getting back to this idea of duty and obligation is the duty, as the teacher would say, of the students to make sure that they understand what the teacher is doing, but the duty and obligation to the professor to be clear, to be sequential, to be logical in his presentation, to start from small concepts and work his way up or down, whatever the case may be, to repeat things regularly so that you can see things in different ways. The obligation of a teacher to be a good communicator like that really is left out of the equation, that mathematical equation or that communication equation in this case. So this is a prime example of what I mean when you're talking about duty and obligation or any term. It's important for you to define that term for yourself so that when you walk into social situations like a school, like a class, you're not really under any form of illusion or disillusionment that you are practicing duty and obligation while someone else isn't. So you have really a balanced approach. And it's very important to do that, not so that you can criticize or condemn. I found that there's not a lot of value in taking that approach, but simply so that you can develop a strategy that's based upon reality, that's based upon how things actually work. So that when you're using duty and obligation, you know what it means as people are using it, and you're looking for those situations where there's some kind of reciprocity or there's some kind of balance for how people are using that word. Another example would be a contract. What I'm saying is really not that novel. When you're thinking about a contract, most of the time what happens in a contract is that people are looking for a mutually beneficial agreement before they will sign a contract. That's the basis of the idea of a contractual arrangement. So this principle of contractual arrangements is very useful. Same thing when you're using words like duty and obligation. It's a contractual obligation. There are more than just your side. There are other sides involved, and if you're not aware of that, getting back to self-awareness, that's one of the important ideas and characteristics that I've talked about in another segment of the show, so I encourage you to look for that segment on self-awareness at theshinseimethod.com or at the YouTube channel. But being aware about terms is really an important aspect of the Shinsei method of analyzing those terms and using them in a way that makes sense for you. And it's more than just an academic exercise. It allows you to be able to set up a strategy that allows you to navigate through various social situations in the world as it is. When you're faced with a thing like a health crisis or a pandemic or a global crisis, a financial crisis, you can filter through and work through a strategy or develop a strategy based upon a reality-oriented strategy and not something that is really promulgated by a lot of other people, but they may not have a bare relationship to reality, like duty and obligation and how it's used in many social settings. Until the next time on the Derek Evans Show, where we discuss the Shinsei method and other topics relevant to you, to your business, to your work, to your family, to your life.